Hello, my name's Jeff Pauk. I'm a land surveyor in Illinois, have a business here in Edwardsville. I'm one of the directors for the Madison County Historical Society. I'm a genealogist, historian, as well as a owner of a cemetery. Like many of people that have been involved with cemetery preservation, the one thing that I was wanting to find out is what's the proper way of doing this sort of work. So last year I attended a cemetery preservation workshop that was put on by the Illinois State Historical Society that was taught by a gentleman by the name of John Heider, H-E-I-D-E-R, who owns RIP Limited. And then the other instructor was Don Cobb, who is an archaeologist with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. The basic workshop covered cleaning and simple straightening procedures for headstones, as well as the process of acquiring a permit through the Department of Natural Resources in order to perform that sort of work. A lot of people don't realize is that this sort of work does require a permit by the state if it's in an unregistered cemetery, and we will go into that in just a little bit as to what makes a cemetery unregistered versus registered. But a lot of this it is regulated, but most people don't realize that, and the title of this is First Do No Harm. A big part of the reason for that is there are a lot of people with good intentions that end up doing more harm than good in trying to do a preservation project for a cemetery. So I'm trying to bring a little bit of education to the forefront on this and give some people some advanced information so they can sign up for a workshop or get further education to do what they need to do. So as I mentioned, the title is First Do No Harm. This is an old phrase that from the medical field that is very applicable to cemetery preservation. People have done work on headstones, such as cleaning. They have tried anchoring the headstones, and they've done irreparable damage as a result to the old headstones without being aware of what they were doing. So the purpose is to give you some background information on what sorts of things you can do and how to go about this process. But as I had mentioned, you do have to be trained or take a training class that's sponsored by the Department of Natural Resources in order to perform this sort of work. You do not have to be trained necessarily, but you have to make sure that somebody that is trained is part of the planning process as well as the work process. So the Illinois Department of Natural Resources and the Illinois Historic Preservation Agency has put together a handbook on cemetery preservation. It is available online, and we will be providing the web address so you can access that. But it is a guide to preservation. Keep in mind that this handbook applies to unregistered cemeteries. Cemeteries are either, as I mentioned before, they're either registered or unregistered. If they are registered, it means that they are an operational cemetery that are registered with the state, and they're operating under what's called the Cemetery Oversight Act. Unregistered cemeteries are publicly or privately owned, which are no longer operational and are not maintaining a registration with the state of Illinois. So those cemeteries fall under the umbrella of protection of the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. All unregistered graves, grave sites, artifacts, and markers of burial sites that is in an unregistered cemetery and over 100 years old are protected by what's called the Illinois Human Skeletal Remains Act. This act restricts the excavation, cultivation, vandalism, removal, defacement, or desecration of grave sites, or prohibits any of that from occurring, and does not allow for anything to be done to these sites if a grave site or remains are accidentally uncovered. Work must stop immediately, and the coroner of the county needs to be notified within 48 hours. Knowingly disturbing a grave site or artifacts it's a Class A misdemeanor, but it has a penalty of up to 6 months of imprisonment and a $10,000 fine per violation. So that means that if there are multiple grave sites, then those would be multiple violations. Penalties can include the confiscation of equipment used in excavation. So subsequent violations after being previously warned or previously charged with a misdemeanor, those can be considered a Class 4 felony. So what do we need to do to preserve a cemetery? Or what do you need to do to consider preserving a cemetery? First step is to do research. You need to find out who owns the cemetery, who may be buried in those cemeteries, what work has been done previously. Try to find out if there has been any other prior attempts at restoring headstones. What other sorts of records might there be available, such as the Madison County Genealogical Society keeps indexes of cemeteries throughout the county. And some of those indexes were prepared when the cemetery might have been in a better condition than what it currently is. So consulting those resources might be beneficial to finding out what headstones were there at the time and what the information was off of those headstones. Second item, you need to get permission to proceed from the landowner. And not only getting permission from the landowner, but also from any other landowners whose land you may have to cross to get to the cemetery. And it needs to be written permission. Keep in mind that not getting permission constitutes trespassing, even if you are a direct descendant. If needed, you may need to do some brush clearing in order to have access to the grave sites. As long as the ground or the grave markers is not disturbed, you can clear brush from the site. But the important thing is that you cannot do anything to disturb the ground or the existing grave markers. The second primary stage of preparing to do the work is getting your documentation together and assess the cemetery features. So for example, the markers that may be at the grave site, any fences, any pathways that may exist, roads, vegetation. That assessment needs to be made in order to figure out what your course of action would be and what needs to be done to better preserve the cemetery site. The third stage, what you need to do is rank the problems and group them into similar sorts of activities. What this does is it allows you to approach the project in a more effective manner. For example, trying to do cleaning projects all kind of in the same time period where you're using the same sort of materials. Whereas if you have to do a straightening of headstones or resetting them on a new base, those you have the same sorts of materials to do that sort of work on site. And you need to know, are you doing site cleaning or repair? Are you doing marker cleaning? You need to take photographs of all the headstones from various sides. You need to have note if you're needing to repair markers, what type of repairs you need to do, and if you're needing to reset the markers, are you strictly straightening them? Have the markers fallen over completely and need to be reset on their base? You need to note exactly the details of what needs to be done. You need to develop or estimate your costs, and if you're going to do any fundraising to offset the costs, and an anticipated schedule. The important thing about scheduling is try not to be too overly ambitious in the process. Make sure to allot plenty of time for the process. Then after you put all this information together, then you need to develop a preservation management plan. The management plan should include research. It should include all the identification information, the documentation, your assessments. Do not make rubbings on the headstones as part of the documentation process. Rubbings can actually cause damage to headstones, especially older marble stones and slate stones. So that's one very important thing to note, that do not use rubbings, do not use chalk on headstones. You're very restricted as to the sorts of things that you can do with the headstones. But some of the best things that you can do is take photographs, especially if you can redirect the light. Sometimes it will bring out the writing within the headstone with redirected light, more than just straight overhead sunlight. And the thing to keep in mind too is that a lot of times digital cameras will bring out images in the photograph that you might not be able to see with the naked eye. And then establish goals that you want to meet. You will fill out the application for the permit, which we will post later, and then note that you're going to conduct the preservation work and submit it to the DNR. This application includes written permission from the landowner and any adjoining landowners whose land you need to access. Maps showing the cemetery location and any other historical information on the cemetery. Some older maps may actually show the cemetery location, so make sure to show not only current maps, but show any older maps that may apply. Make sure you have someone involved with the project that has taken the training. Within 30 days of completion of work, after you've received your permit and have done the work, but within 30 days of completion, you need to send a report that summarizes the work that was done to the Department of Natural Resources. That report should include photographs showing the work that was completed, showing new photographs, for example, of the headstones after work was done, and any comments or additional information that the DNR would find useful. So, as I stated before, the name of the workshop was First Do No Harm, but the second thing to keep in mind is that all work that you do should be reversible. For example, if you do any sort of actual repair to headstones, there are materials that are available now where it does grouts and things like that that can be removed with appropriate materials. So you want to do things that can be undone if better procedures are developed in the future. Important things that I want to make sure to mention: do not use any household or industrial cleaners, including there's a there's an item that has been mentioned in numerous resources called wet and forget. Anything that leaves a residue on the headstone is going to cause harm to the headstone over time. So please do not use wet and forget as part of the process. Don't use any power tools. Don't use any metal scrapers. And especially don't use concrete on any part of the headstone, because the chemicals in concrete can react with the materials and cause further damage. And no adhesives, unless it's among those that are explicitly approved by the DNR. And as I mentioned, at the end we'll provide links to the Illinois Historic Cemetery Preservation Handbook and the permit application, as well as the workbook for the preservation training for future reference. So you have an idea of the sorts of things that you need to be considering during the preservation process. And we will also provide the National Park Service briefs on preservation of cemeteries. So thank you for your time. We will be showing some videos showing a sample gravesite and some of the sorts of things you need to be considering when you're doing the work. Thank you. So among the things that we would want to do is fill out a worksheet, which that workbook that I mentioned, or the application process, they have a cemetery survey form that you can fill out, which you basically go through, put your name, the cemetery name. For example, we are at the Whiteside Cemetery at SIU right now, and but you mentioned on there the type of ownership, the location of it, the dimensions and features, if you know what the size of the cemetery is. Number of headstones, so you do the best estimate that you can in the process. But then it gets more into genealogical information on the cemetery, the people that were buried there, if there were any important persons or events associated with the cemetery. For example, this is William Whiteside, who had a very, the Whiteside family had a very strong link to Madison County history in particular, as well as state history. But it asks for the type of stone, which some of the materials gives information on how to determine the type of stone it is. This is a white marble stone, for an example. Ethnic groups, if those are known, and then what kind of integrity. So basically you kind of go through the process. There's a checklist that shows the types of structures and materials that were found, whether they're damaged, and the types of damage, whether it's collapsed or fallen, missing pieces, stained, biological growth. You can see we have some lichens in this case that are starting to grow on the headstone, so you would make note of that, and approximately how much of it is covered by that. But you would fill out on that information for each of the headstones that you find. Other information for general site cleanup. So, for example, if you're going to be cutting all the trees and brush away from the stone, and an approximate size of the area that you're going to clear. And also, it asks for a type of whether the type of monument that you have. For example, a pedestal obelisk, which I believe is the type that's here. Once again, there are references with photographs in materials that show the different types of Also, any special ornaments that are on it, if it has an urn on it, or if it has a sculpture that's on the top, any kind of relief decoration, and description on it. And then any other epitaphs, anything that can be read, you would list any of and all of that. So generally, you would on some of the details on the headstones, you would fill that information out per headstone. And then you would take a camera, preferably a digital camera, and would start taking pictures not only of the headstone from a distance, but you would also try to get photographs up close and at different angles, because the light may show different things at different angles. So you may be able to get some information that would be beneficial. Now, for example, on this side, the sun, this whole side is shaded. So we would go ahead and get our photographs here. For example, a large reflective mirror could be used to redirect the light onto the writing, so that you get different shadows as a result, and may be able to read the lettering. So, for example, this one probably has, up on top, there's a flat base, so there's probably some sort of urn or some sort of object that was on the very top of it that is no longer there. But anyway, you go through, you do that for each of the headstones that you find. Do a thorough inventory of everything, and then submit all of that to